Okay, as my previous panelists started with introduction, I will kindly ask you to introduce yourself and your company's initiatives. Yeah, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Ivona. I am one of the leaders of EUing movement, which goes for Pan-European entity, and also COO of Project Europe, a fund founded by Harry Stebbings, run by Kitty and Jade. We invest across Europe in early stage companies.
Hi everyone, I'm Cam. I'm an ex-founder and operator, currently a GP at Notion Capital. We're an early stage fund based out of London, investing all over Europe, currently deploying out of a 300 million euro fund, and we focus on B2B companies. But other than that, we're very generalist in terms of business model and products.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrick. I'm the founding partner of Form. We are a pre-seed and seed fund, and we focus specifically on regulated markets, be it either the traditional regulated markets, so fintech, health, energy, transport, and so on, or what we see as the next generation of regulated markets, so new markets that aren't fully regulated yet, things like crypto, lab-grown meat, carbon offsetting, and a bunch of other markets.
Thank you. Let's start with the big question that frames the entire discussion. Can Europe win the AI race, and why or why not? Camille, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I'm almost wondering if this is the sort of right question, because the premise of the question is super broad.
Yeah.
And I think often we run astray when trying to, for example, compare Europe and the US. So I would maybe reinstate the question by saying, where can Europe win and why will it win? And I think, if we're thinking about, will Europe become a leader in natural language models, or will Europe build the next hyperscaler? I'd say probably this cycle will be similar to the previous cycle, and probably it won't. But I'm very, very sure that we'll create a lot of sort of leading application layer companies. And I'm actually confident that 90% of the value in AI will be captured by those application layer companies.
Thank you. Patrick.
Pass over to you, or you?
I go, well, I'm quite optimistic more around that. I mean, it's a very broad question, because I think the question really is, does Europe want to compete as Europe, or does it want to compete on a kind of national level? If we can create a continental scale, bring capital markets, build basic infrastructure which enables that capital to be deployed, I think we have a chance at building, not sure if it's AI, but definitely like the next wave of technology in Europe, deep tech companies, and can definitely win there. But as I said, if it's like, let's say France, Poland, or Germany, competing against US or China, that's probably impossible. But if we can build that level of continental scale, which attracts that level of funding that we see in America or China, then potentially yes, but it really needs to go hand in hand with making sure that we are building the best infrastructure in Europe. And at the moment, we don't have capital markets. We are just in the moment creating EUing, which is a pan-European company that will enable companies to operate across Europe and raise money. It's a very first step in that, but I think if we can, continue on building pan-European solutions, then perhaps yes. So as Europe, we can, but we are still lacking that infrastructure to compete.
Thank you.
That's my view.
Patrick.
Yeah, I think I agree, Cam, with your initial response, which is to almost unbundle the question. So what's the specific race we're saying we're competing in, whether that's by vertical or by part of the stack? And there's no doubt we're already winning in parts of that stack. So if you look at Synthesia's news today or 11 Labs, we're already winning certain AI races. We probably won't, to your point on China, we won't be able to compete in each of those races, but I guess it's about finding where we have strategic advantage and kind of doubling down there. I think that the area that I'm most reluctant, the debate that I find I'm most wary of is the kind of global protectionist, let's try and kind of at the level, let's be defeatist now, at the level of Europe, let's just try to have full stack in Europe and try to win win kind of on our own terms and just have like a European version of everything, and that's what success looks like. I find this the most like worrying kind of debate. I understand for security reasons they're a part of the stack we want to either onshore or guarantee access to, but it's when we define global success in those terms, that's when I find I get a bit concerned.
It's like a managed decline with better branding.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we all can agree that asking a question and when that question raises another lot of questions is a good starting point because we are starting to think, as maybe you said, optimistic how to solve and how to get to some maybe future goal in a near future, let's say like that. But let's unpack a bit further, starting with where the opportunity actually lies. Camille, from an enterprise AI perspective, where do you see Europe's strongest opportunities today, and where is it already falling behind?
So we already mentioned some names where we are leading on the AI front, you know, whether it's Synthesia, 11 Labs, Lovable, Aikido in our own portfolio. I think there's ample of opportunities because we have an ecosystem of, you know, industry that manufactures a lot of things. We have a very robust service industry. We have a very robust financial services industry. And I think for majority of opportunities that are emerging in AI, they're actually not in the historical sort of software spend as much as they are in what we would define as labor spend. So there's ample of opportunities, and we are already proving that we can internationalize those products really well. You know, the challenges are that as soon as any of European companies become successful in that execution, it needs to raise that 100 million rounds, and there really aren't many funds in Europe that can write a 100 million check. And then what happens with that company is that the HQ gets moved to the US, the IP gets moved to the US, and the go-to-market is executed in the US, which means that apart from the initial European jurisdiction where the company starts, other European countries don't really benefit from that technology because it's so difficult for founders to expand across a fragmented market. But I would say, you know, I expect Europe to be one of the leading forces in terms of AI application layers specifically. You know, when it comes to rebuilding things like hyperscalers or large language models, I think when you look at Silicon Valley, they do have a 70-year head start over us. And it's kind of unfair to say, oh, Europe now needs to build a hyperscaler. But application layer, you know, we are already doing extremely well, and I think the momentum is only rising.
Thank you. Beyond technology itself, the regulatory environment also plays a major role in shaping how companies grow and scale. Europe is known for leading on regulation from AI to fintech and beyond. Patrick, based on your opinion, is regulation currently a competitive advantage or a constraint when it comes to scaling AI companies?
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone give like a good defense really of saying like that we, maybe outside Brussels itself, that we win through regulating. There's no doubt that offering founders like a predictable regime and then knowing what just the lay of the land, like that is a benefit. It's hard to say. I mean, you can see the number of times big tech has refused to launch products in the EU specifically because of the EU AI Act. It's hard to say at the moment that's a competitive advantage. I had an interesting, I can't remember where I heard it, someone gave a good defense of saying that one thing Europe does have is the ability to regulate. So the EU AI Act might not be perfect now, or you might even say it's not good now. But I think we can all probably agree at this point that regulation of AI is going to be not just a one and done issue, it's going to be probably for the rest of our lives. This is going to be discussed how like the waves of AI should be regulated. That in a way, Europe is in a better position to exercise its muscle to regulate, and it won't get it right straight away, but it will hopefully continue to iterate, whereas what the US has shown on some particularly tough to regulate issues is it sometimes just not capable of regulating. And I guess you could ask what the downstream effects of that is if, say, foundation models are predominantly in the US and what that means. But I do think there's something to saying that like our mindset towards regulation and towards government intervention in Europe is just more balanced, and therefore if we like say Dennis at DeepMind predicts like we will need some form of regulation, then Europe is well positioned hopefully to do that, and we just have to get it right.
Yeah, I would say, when it comes to regulation, I think of regulation as something that should be the enabler rather than a blocker. So as soon as I think what are the sort of 3 major regulatory things that could really facilitate growth in the European startup ecosystem, it's probably changing the regulation related to pension to unlock more capital for startups. It's changing stock options plans across Europe, because most of the jurisdictions actually penalize founders rather than creating rewards on par with the US. And it's probably creating better talent mobility across the EU. I think UK global talent visa is good, but I don't think the equivalents exist in all the countries. So that's kind of how I think of regulation, rather than let's regulate the hell out of this industry so European companies can win.
Ivona, EU Inc. Aims to create a single framework for startups across Europe. How transformative could this be for AI companies trying to scale?
Very good question. I think I'm just going to add a comment to the regulation, but I think it's a big distraction. The biggest problem in Europe is fragmentation, and fixing that and starting to use regulation for using this as a tool to integrate the single market through creating something like EU Inc., through integrating the capital markets. And there are loads of conversations right now happening, so there is really hope that they will become really a reality. And it's very important that Europe creates the solutions, pan-European solutions that we need to create hyperscalers for security reasons. So yes, in terms of EU Inc., I'm super excited. We've created such a big movement and momentum over the past 1.5 years as an ecosystem. So all of the startup association investors have signed our petition. We've turned this into a big moment, but also into concrete legal proposal. And it is now at the top of the EU policy at the European Commission. They have already submitted a draft of that. So it's really a first step in a broader context of creating those pan-European solutions that can allow companies to actually stay, so we can capture the value, because we are so good at innovating and we have amazing talent. We even have capital. We just don't have the tools to deploy this capital to have that kind of mindset. Oh yes, I am accessing now continental scale as a company. I am a European company from day one, because unfortunately a lot of companies still operate in silos. If we look at the data, only 80% of startups, early stage, I'm talking about pre-seed, seed, consider themselves pan-European. What a pity for Europe. And of course, what Camille mentioned about being able to incentivize employees, and because talent is distributed across all of Europe, we need a pan-European ESOP solution. And when I say a broader context, that means also over time, not only creating this integrated capital market, but also at some point an IPO and exit opportunities. We need to create what I like to call Schengen zone for startups, where you can access procurement opportunities, etc. I mean, look at Europe, we're creating amazing companies, 11 Labs, Lovables. A lot of these companies are incorporated in the US. So we really need to create a basic infrastructure, and EU Inc. is just that, the first step in what maybe one day will become a full cycle of I'm going to stay in Europe, I'm going to incorporate, I'm going to get cross-border funding, and then I'm going to be able to incentivize employees across all of Europe. It will be more centralized. And then, of course, there will be more private capital coming in, because there will be momentum, more confidence. And then, of course, exit opportunities. So there are 6 countries at the moment. We're discussing market integration. There's this approach of two-speed Europe. If some countries are moving too slow, we can decide and go ahead without. And I think this is exactly how we need to start thinking about those pan-European solutions.
Thank you. We heard a couple of times that we have a strength in talent. We also have we are creating a regulation and moving forward. We have emerging structural initiatives, but it still leaves a question on where Europe should focus. So I will ask each of you just to give a short answer based on your opinion. Is Europe's advantage more in building AI models or in applying AI within industries? Patrick, you can start, then Camille and Yvonne.
So I'm biased because of our thesis, but I think, one of the winners actually that we haven't mentioned, global winners, is Revolut. And I think it's not a coincidence that outside Brazil, we have the main challenger bank globally. And I think our attitude towards vertical regulation, so EU versus UK, perhaps there's a distinction here, because the FCA in particular has a history of like being a really good regulator for basically co-working with fintech startups that could grow quickly. And so my bias is very much towards Europe looking at regulated industries where the regulators can work closely with businesses. So lab-grown meat is another example where the Netherlands is like at the cutting edge of the very frontier of developing lab-grown meat. These are the markets of the future that yes, they require regulation, but if the regulators have the right attitude, we can build huge global winners from Europe. So it does depend on the right mindset. And to the point on the EU Inc., the great impact it's already having, I think this is always the flip side of it for me, which is vertical specific regulation needs to be right. Because for me, that's what is the main issue for companies scaling and why they go to the US and don't go into other European markets. If you're a healthcare company in Europe, in the UK, the idea of going into France or Germany, it's like, a completely different health system with like a fraction of the population in the US. Like, well, you'll always, and there are other reasons I know for going to the US, but it applies to other regulated industries as well. So yes, regulated industries, but we need the regulators to kind of think in the right way.
Thank you. Camille?
I already alluded to this a little bit, but we recently did this whole market analysis of who actually backs AI labs or LLMs. And if you look at the biggest rounds raised by large language model companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, the capital predominantly comes from a handful of multi-stage funds that are very, very large and that pretty much don't exist in Europe. So when we're wondering, should Europe be in the AI model layer, like the AI model layer doesn't really have a customer in capital in Europe. Of course, Mistral is doing a great job, but Mistral alone isn't an ecosystem. On the other hand, application layer companies kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, of those LLMs, of hyperscalers, et cetera. And that's where funding exists. So, we don't have funds like Andreessen Horowitz with 15 billion across 7 strategies in Europe, but we have a lot of GPs who take a lot of risk. Their funds are just not as big. If you look at the UK, for example, and sort of pension fund contributions to venture, so if you take outside of the UK funds contributing to UK venture capital, they're contributing 16 times more than the UK pension funds put together. And then you have institutions like CalPERS in the US, which is 600 billion, putting 100 billion per annum into private capital. That's more money than a whole venture ecosystem of most of European countries. So really, we are designed to build an application layer. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think 90% of the value will be created there. Just like there's a lot more value on the AWS Rails rather than in AWS. I think that's going to be very similar.
Thank you. Yvonne, your thoughts?
I think we have like everything in here, talent, we can probably, opportunities in industrial AI, robotics. I think we need to be able to attract world-class capital, because those are capital-intensive companies. So I guess I'm back to square one, which is like we need an infrastructure that attract that world-class capital, and we need to build that through building the full cycle of like, I incorporate in Europe, I fundraise across the borders, plus I attract US and Asian capital. And then I'm able to then exit, have opportunities in procurement, etc. There's so much to be fixed, but there is also a lot of hope. But it goes hand in hand. So I think we can still create a lot of value in AI and future tech wave. So.
Thank you. I will just say one conclusion that the opportunity is definitely there, but the question is how Europe will execute on it. I would like to thank you for the inspiring discussion, and that's all for today. Please join me.